Alright, well, I'm going to start a new series having to do with the economy. Uh, and I'm going to talk from a weird perspective, an abnormal perspective. I'm going to talk from the perspective of monism, the ontological perspective of monism. um, uh, which means panpsychism, because we're going to be talking about the world soul, or the collective consciousness, the collective mind, the zeitgeist, so on and so forth. And it's going to be what I'm going to talk about from now on until the future is going to be premised on basically one thing, and that is the economy, or the stock market, or markets in general, are at some level an actual entity with self-awareness and its own consciousness. So I'm going to play a clip for you right now, which is very interesting.
Understand what I'm about to tell you. The stock market is literally a living entity. It's the truth. It's the collective consciousness of all its participants, algorithmic or not, because those algorithms were figured out by human beings. You understand? So this market is a living entity. It is also an addict, a drug addict of the highest order.
So that clip that you just watched is from a guy named Gregory Mannarino, and he has a YouTube channel called Gregory Mannarino. This guy is a really smart guy, really interesting character, and he is a self-described Freemason, a 32nd degree, I believe, Freemason, which is one of the higher levels up there. He's like a leader, almost, in Freemasonry. And he spoke about that a short while and kind of downplayed it, like, oh, it's like a fraternity. They're not supposed to talk about religion and politics and stuff like that. So this thing that he just said in this clip, this is a pretty old clip, a few months ago. I've been listening to him for a while, and that sentence, that thing he said, that is the first time he's said that, that I know of, and it's the last time. He's only said it once, and that was the one time he said it. He hasn't talked about it any other time since then. And he's like a charismatic guy, and he has his little sayings that, like everyone does, that are, some of the things he says are a little bit out there, like this. And really most people listening to him would, how they would listen to that is that he wasn't serious. It was kind of like a metaphor. However, I think that he was 100% serious. I think he was. But even if he wasn't serious and it was a metaphor and it's a charismatic saying, I'm going to take that and run with it as if I'm serious. I'm serious about that. See, I don't know anything 100%. I'm just going to explore that concept as if I was 100% serious. And I've learned a lot of things over the years, and I've changed my mind a lot. And based upon what I've learned to be true, there has to be some kind of kernel of truth to that. Another thing I want to say is that the term entity, that's referring to, I would use that term in a monist sense. As in a collective mind, not as a separate ghost entity, like a space ghost flying around. Because most people today in the West are conditioned to imagine, to picture a space ghost flying around. Whether they agree with that or whether they're criticizing it, people are conditioned to imagine a space ghost. But I am not referring to a space ghost flying around. I'm not saying that the stock market is a space ghost looking down on us. Oh. No. All I'm saying is that it could be a conglomeration of many minds working in sync. So then the next thing someone would say is, well, the stock market is not it has no body. It's not like a person. And it's made up of numbers and computers. And therefore it is more like a construct. Yes, I totally agree with you there, and it's weird to wrap your mind around it, but if there are a conglomeration of minds, and monism and panpsychism is true, and there are conglomerations of minds making up higher consciousnesses or larger consciousnesses, it's not just groups of people. It's also groups of animals, or groups of people and animals, or groups of people in particular geographic locations, or geographic locations. It could be an entire planet, an entire star, an entire galaxy. It could be the ocean in its entirety. It could be the Pacific Ocean. Maybe there's an entity that calls itself the Pacific Ocean, and there's another entity which calls itself the Atlantic Ocean. And if you get all the oceans together, and the conglomeration of that spirit is the ocean overall, it has to be like that as well. You can't just say, oh, well, those. Sure, it's more likely that human beings all have a coherent consciousness, because you're watching this and you have a self-awareness, you have a coherent consciousness, and you see other human beings that are like you, and that's how you can kind of guess that they have a coherent self-awareness like you do. But just based upon monism and how characteristics should play into things, you would expect that a lot of mass that is incoherent, in general, will have a net effect of some kind, just because of all these different forces playing out against each other. Well, some of these forces are stronger than others, and it results in a net effect. Just like the Earth itself is not a magnet, and yet the Earth has a magnetic field. Not all of the materials making up this planet are magnetically coherent, and yet, on the whole, there is a net magnetic field. That's kind of what I'm saying. And so the same thing would apply to consciousness, and it would apply to the stock market, believe it or not. And I haven't really, put much thought into it. It's just an interesting idea I want to explore more. And I also want to try to make predictions based upon this logic. I want to make some predictions having to do with the economy or the stock market. And I haven't thought about at all. I haven't spent any time at all thinking about what kind of prediction I would make. So I'm going to think through it right now. Right now. Just based upon this logic. It should be very simple. Well, okay. Do I want to make a prediction for tomorrow, next week, next month? What time scale? So the thing about trying to imagine what higher entities, how they think, it's really difficult because you'd expect the time interval to be a lot larger and take a longer span than you or me. For example, we go to sleep and wake up, and there's cycles in our consciousness, and that takes place over a day. And there's littler cycles in that, like our heartbeat, bunch of cycles that define our consciousness and where it's at any given point in time. But because the stock market is a construct or an entity which is the result of the minds of human beings, then I would try to use the psychology of regular, normal human beings to anticipate the thoughts, the behaviors, the results of the stock market. And I have basic knowledge. I have a psychology degree, psychology, a BS, Bachelor of Science degree in psychology research. I've taken a variety of different courses. I know of the general paradigms, and psychology just on just a one human level isn't perfect. It's not perfectly understood. There are a bunch of little variables that affect people, and so yeah, cycles, bunch of little variables that affect a human's mind. Yes, the stock market is affected largely by emotion, primarily fear and greed. I have traded a bit in cryptocurrencies, and based upon my knowledge of generally how people think and how markets work, I've just based on that knowledge of fear and greed in markets, I've made some money trading cryptos. You can really you can make more money if you stop lying to yourself and think that people actually care about the fundamentals of things. like people say, oh man, Bitcoin's so great because it's like decentralized and it's like going to replace it. No one cares. People just want to make money. People are greedy. They want to make money. People got in because they wanted to make money fast. People got out because they didn't want to lose money. It's as simple as that. Once you understand that and how people think in that way, you're going to make more money. So in that spirit, one could, I guess, view, for example, the Bitcoin market as kind of like, well, it had the emotion of greed going up, and then it had the emotion of fear. The collective fear of all the people involved trying to get their money out. That was the emotion felt by the Bitcoin, the entity called Bitcoin. It's such a weird way to think about it, but and you can see how there are cycles. Up, down, sharp changes in emotion. There, I mean, if you study how markets work, there are patterns. It's almost like it's. I never thought about this before, but it's almost kind of like a good analogy is like an EEG, like brain waves. There are predetermined patterns in brain waves that kind of let you know what someone's mindset is, and that's what the market is. It's like an EEG to let you know what the general mindset is of that collective set of feelings, desires. I almost forgot to talk about this. I'm going to keep coming up with analogies, but one thing that people talk about a lot these days, like people who are really skeptical about the system, like especially the Austrian economic people who are like into gold and stuff, and oh man, there's like too much debt and this can't go on forever. A lot of those people use certain language like, oh, the Fed is printing money and it's kind of like it's like easy money and they're injecting, see the word injecting drugs into the market. The easy money, the printing of the money is like injecting drugs into the market. And that's a perfect analogy, I think, because it's, and if you think of the market as an entity with consciousness, then that actually means that this market is like a high drug addict. Literal high drug addict. It's an analogy. You can't, there's no real way to imagine a good parallel to the life of you or me, but a lot of people have been making the prediction that the stock market's going to crash at some point once this easy money loses its efficacy, because basically what's going on is that the stock market would have crashed. It actually has crashed a few times. It started to crash a few times, and there are systems put in place to print money and buy things to push the stock market up. So they've prevented the stock market from dropping. That's the simplest way I can put it. And you know, you can kind of think of it as like someone who's high and they're coming down from their high, but they get injected with more drugs. And they just keep getting injected with more drugs, and they're just someone's just keeps injecting them with more doses of drugs, just nonstop. So the idea is, well, at some point, things are gonna start going south, real fast. You know, that strategy is not going to work forever. And I have no experience at all with that happening to people. I don't know if well, I can tell you one thing though. If that was happening to a real live human being, that's not healthy. That's not healthy behavior. They're not going to come out the other side healthy and cognizant. It could kill a person doing that. That would kill someone. Depending on the drug. At least for a long time, they'd be out of it. Or in a coma. So, I do want to make a prediction that is different than that, though, because that's a prediction that everyone's been making for a long time. And it wouldn't be a good prediction. Let me think. Let me think of a good prediction. So they're high and I don't know. Whatever. I think I've been rambling for long enough. I'll if I think of a prediction, then I'll make another video.